a moment just to close your eyes and imagine the tall trunks of trees. Imagine the rustling whisper of leaves in the breeze. Imagine the smell of the dark soil, perhaps the squelch under your feet of the mulch of the forest floor, or the softness of thick moss, the trickling gurgle of a stream, weaving its way, splishing and splashing down through the damp banks with their curling ferns.
The twilight gleam is in her eye, the night is on her head, and a lovesick spell she casts. She has my heart in thrall, nor life I owe, nor liberty. For love is Lord of all, and often when the beetles fall, hath lulled the eve to sleep, I steal unto a secret glade, and through the dooring peep, there on the cricket singing stone, she spreads the boleward fern, and hums in sad sweet undertone the song of heart's desire. Her welcome, like her love for me, is from her heart within. Her warm kiss is felicity that knows no taint of sin. And when I stir my foot to go, 'tis leaving love and light to feel the wind of longing blow, and from out the dark of night.
I realise it's always a danger at a storytelling show to invite people to close their eyes. So if you've been asleep, you're welcome to wake up again. If you need to sleep, that's also welcome. Because long ago on the border with Scotland, the forest there spread like a cloak as far as the horizon. And high on a hill looking down at that thick and stretching forest, there was the castle of Carter Hall. And in the castle of Carter Hall there lived Margaret, the daughter of the lord of the castle. She was young, she was quick-witted, she was fiery-tempered, and she was filled with longing. Every time she looked out of the windows at that stretching forest with its deep green, she felt something in her pulled towards that place. One afternoon, it was late summer, and the warm sun was turning that green a gold in its dying light. She couldn't resist any longer. When no one was looking, Margaret pulled on her strongest boots, threw a light cloak around her shoulders, and snuck out. Out of corridors, out of courtyards, out of gardens, out of meadows, across the fields, and in to that welcoming wall of green. Margaret came across a clearing hung with creeping, dripping vines of wildflowers, like lanterns of bright colour with a scent that honeyed the air, soft petals. And she reached out to pluck a flower. Just as she reached, stop! A voice rang across that clearing. And before she could even turn, suddenly a hand on her wrist, pulling it down. Beside her, a young man with flashing eyes. Stop! This wood, these flowers belong to me. How dare you pick them without my leave? And she looked at him. What? This is nonsense. My father owns these woods. These flowers belong to me. Sparks flew. Their eyes met. And fierceness turned to fancy. Their hands softened. And as they drank each other in, and smiles crept across both their faces, their fingers found each other's palms, they began to circle. Something danced into life between them. A softness and a sweetness. And I think all of you have enough life experience to know what happens in a fairy tale when love at first sight strikes the hearts of hero and heroine. They passed that afternoon in a haze of sweet love on the sweet grass of the forest floor.
It's you I love so deep. I wish that I could go with you, or you could stay with me.
She fell asleep, wrapped in his warm arms. But when she woke, he'd vanished. And the whole wood felt suddenly dim, cold, seeped into her bones. And all was silent and hushed and empty. He'd vanished. She didn't know his name. No sign of him at all. So she drew the cloak round her shoulders and she made the long walk home. Back in the halls of her father's castle, time passed. And Margaret began to change. As time passed and autumn grew, she noticed a swelling in her belly. She woke in the mornings feeling sick. And her women and her handmaidens noticed before she did and grew worried. As October yawned its long nights, one woman took her by the hand. "My lady, I think you've loved a little too long, and now you're with child." And another woman took her other hand, drew her to the window. "My lady, an unwanted child is a dangerous thing. But if you go deep into the woods, there is a herb that grows there, bitter and grey. It will take a child from you if you eat it." And Margaret, she'd thought of nothing but that young man, and she'd seen neither hide nor hair. So that day, she pulled a cloak around her shoulders, and when no one was looking, she left corridor and courtyard. She left the gardens, left the meadows, left the fields, and went back in as mist wreathed around her feet and the brown leaves rustled underfoot.
Through bushes and through briars, I've lately made my way, all for to find a healing herb, to take this baby away, all for to find a healing herb, to take this baby away.
where once there had been a ceiling of wild flowers, now a carpet of bitter grey herbs. And Margaret stretched out her hand to pick and eat. But just as she stretched out, stop! She looked, and there he was. And suddenly by her side and his hand on her wrist, and he pulled her up. Stop! How can you do this? How can you eat this herb when we have a child that has come from our love? And she pulled free from him. How can you ask me when you disappeared? I don't know your name. I don't know if you're human. Tell me who you are. He took her hands again. He pressed them against his warm chest. My name is Tamlin, and I'm human just like you. But years ago, when I was riding out on a cold winter's day, I fell from my horse into the forest. I was lost. And the Queen of Elfland found me. She is beautiful, she is terrible, she is cruel. She took me under the fairy hill. I've been bound to her ever since, the Queen of the Fairies. But Margaret, I love you, and only you can help me. Listen close. And then he told her that that night was Halloween, when the whole fairy court would ride out of the fairy hill and through the woods, led by the Queen, followed by the brown horse, followed by the white, and he would be on the white horse if she wanted to save him from his fate. What she must do is hide under the mill bridge. When they ride past, she must pull him from his horse. She must keep hold no matter what. And he would be changed in her arms into many terrible things. And she must keep hold if she wants to see her love again. Then Tamlin disappeared into the woods. And Margaret left the herb alone and went home. She waited until night fell. Then she pulled on her sturdiest boots. She threw around her a thick, dark cloak, and as the moon shimmered down, sparkling silver, then she went back on Halloween night into the forest. Dark forest rustled like crow's feathers. The moon glinted down. And Margaret made her way all the way to where the river ran under the bridge amidst the trees. She hid and she waited until the dead hour of the night. And then she heard in the distance the sound of hooves and the ringing of bells. the fairy court road. Through the trees she could see the gleam of their eyes like slivers of moon. She could hear the breath of the horses. And they came, faster and faster and faster through the night, led by the fairy queen whose eyes blazed like fire. Suddenly she was there and she was racing across the bridge. Her horse flew like a shadow through the night. The fairy queen's hair streamed out, her cloak the horse's mane. She rode past in the darkness, and behind her then the brown horse, and then the white, and Margaret leapt out. She pulled Tamlin from that horse and she held on tight. As soon as Tamlin hit the floor, the fairy queen wheeled around. She saw Tamlin in Margaret's arms and she cried out. The stars burst into droplets of meteor fire in the sky, and the fairy queen shrieked, "Oh, Tamlin is away!" In Margaret's arms, suddenly he changed. From the man she'd been holding, he was turned into a lion. A lion that roared and snarled, its teeth and its claws like knives, but she held on. With all of her might, she held this thing in her arms that was wild, and she remembered it was the father of her child. And then the queen screamed again, and he was changed from a lion into a snake that writhed and hissed and spat, its jaws snapping, teeth and tongue full of poison. She held on tight. And although it was a snake, she remembered it was a mortal man and held on. And then the queen screamed again, the stars blazed, and he was changed from a snake into a red-hot bar of iron that hissed and steamed in her hand, glowing hot. She held on, and it did her no harm as she walked, holding tight to the edge of the bridge. There she dropped it, and the iron fell down, 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 splashing and sinking into the water. Out of the river, coughing and spluttering and covered in water, but naked and human and alive, Tamlin heaved himself onto the bank. And Margaret saw her beloved, and she ran. She took that cloak from her shoulders, she wrapped him warm and tight and held him to her chest. The fairy host disappeared into the night, leaving only the queen on her horse, who stared down with fury as Margaret held Tamlin in her arms. "I should have torn out your eyes, Tamlin, and put in 2 eyes of wood. I should have torn out your heart and put in a heart of stone. But it was too late." Margaret stood between the queen and Tamlin, and she said, "Go. You have no more power, he is mine. I have won him, I have taken every test, and he is free to be himself with me. Go." The queen snarled and wheeled her horse and disappeared. And Margaret, she took Tamlin's warm hand in hers. They held each other tight. And hand in hand, they began to walk back through the forest. As the sun rose and lit the world from the east, and light came creeping back into that place, they walked home hand in hand, human and friend, the child safe in her belly, and a warm home and a warm heart